Hello and welcome to Eavesdropping at the Movies. I'm Mike.
And I'm Jose.
And we're talking about Dear Zachary, a letter to a son about his father, which is a documentary by Kurt Kuenne. And it's about his friend Andrew Bagby. And that is as much as you can say without spoiling it.
Let's spoil it.
Yeah, let's spoil it from the start. So this is a documentary. It's essentially true crime, but it's a personal story. Andrew Bagby was killed in 2001 by his ex-girlfriend, who he'd recently broken up with, who was some 10, 15 years his senior, who'd driven something like 1,600 miles.
Yeah, 16 hours.
Yeah, that's right, 16 hours from the east coast of Canada to Iowa, I think, to kill him. And it's then revealed that she was pregnant with his son, who's called Zachary. So this film is, as the title says, it's for Zachary when he grows up to learn about his dad, who he was, because he's never going to meet him. It's interviews with friends and family, particularly Andrew's parents. And it is full of shocks and twists. The biggest one of which is that Zachary was also killed as a baby when he was a couple of years old by his mother, and it was a murder-suicide. Yeah. And ultimately, this story, which in Canada, I guess, was a massive, massive story. I hadn't heard it before.
I hadn't heard of it.
Led to changes and reforms in Canada's child protection system, bail system, because this was all about someone who should have been in prison, was let out, a child was let into her care, and obviously it all went incredibly sour. I had heard of this once or twice. It was one of these, you knew it was homemade, and people talked about the editing. And the reason that it came up for me recently was because I was watching an interview with Louis Theroux, a promotional interview where he was promoting his book. And the publishers had put out this interview where it was his top 5 documentaries, or 5 documentaries he'd recommend. And there was Exit Through the Gift Shop, The Thin Blue Line, this one, The Act of Killing, and The Jinx. And he didn't say much, right? We just watched the 30 seconds where he talks about it, and he says about as much as I did. It's incredibly moving, but you don't want to give it away. I was really moved, pretty stunned by its construction.
Yes. I was very moved as well. I was kind of teary-eyed, though I had a complex response where on the one hand you're feeling something, but on the other hand you're thinking something else. Yeah, more critical. So the whole first part is about how wonderful Zachary's father is. Yeah, and you see, because it's a very middle-class family that we're talking about. So they were making movies since they were children, and he'd grown up in the same town with all these friends. So there's almost like footage of him at every stage of his life. Yeah, and there's footage of him, both in America and in England with the English family.
Because his mother's English.
Yeah, and he's obviously like a really charismatic kind of, regular guy. I don't know what else, how else to describe it. So, part of my response to that was a kind of, I think me as a gay man looking at that, on the one hand, you find the attractions, the appeal. Yeah, it is. It does seem like a wonderful family and and a wonderful milieu. And then you also have like kind of this resentment, that
you resent the normality. Or...
It's kind of like an envy, that you can only have that kind of life if you are a regular guy, if you fit in with everybody, right? He's everybody's best friend. He's got kind of lots of social ease. He's never been an outsider, though he has his own insecurities. So I'm looking at that. And it's almost like idyllic. It's an idyllic upbringing that you're being shown, which to me is not totally believable. No. I just think people aren't like that, right? Like, and actually one of the characters says, no, people really, you're expected to say this when people die, but really he was like that. And I'm thinking, well, there has to be like a darker side. Everybody has one, right? Like, and they do say that there were maybe things that he did in secret that they don't know about, but But really, kind of, that's almost like a throwaway, really. What you're getting constantly is just, how wonderful father-son relationship, wonderful family relationship, wonderful family in England. He was everybody's best friend, and, he was the person everybody wanted as a best man.
It's not a profile as much as a love letter.
It's a love letter. Yeah,
loves
absolutely.
This guy.
Yeah, and so everybody loves this guy.
But I agree with you. I'm sorry to interrupt, but I agree with you about the throwaway thing about, there must be a dark side, and the film slightly alludes to that. But I felt actually it was more than a throwaway thing. It was actually a kind of a cheat, because at one point, Kurt, the director who narrates it, says he discovers after Andrew's death that he was interested in photography and he took photos. Now, I'd never known this. What other things didn't I know? And that is a particular line, I think, that stays with you, and you think, oh, this is the direction it's going to go, and you're going to discover this guy's secret life, and you don't. Okay, actually the two things you get are he took photos, which I didn't know, and he had this relationship with this much older woman that people didn't know, and there's a question of what was this about, what was their appeal to each other, but it doesn't investigate that, and it can't really, I suppose. But the fact that it alludes to it as though it is going to, and then doesn't develop that, I didn't like.
Yeah. The film is full of cheats. Throughout, I would say an hour or more into the movie, it's Dear Zachary, really. So, and you're told, this is a film for you so that you would get to know your father. Right? Everything is addressed to this child that, you're going to be told didn't live past the age of 2. Yeah, so that is a real cheat, I think. And I think that could have been handled more honestly. Yeah, kind of. You are manipulated into thinking that this is kind of a film that is done for the child, and of course, initially it was, right?
Yeah, the film was being made after Andrew's death, but before his son's death.
Yeah, but I think it's a cheat not to have reconceptualized that element. Actually,
I think that's probably fair. Even though the moment that it is revealed that Zachary's dead in this murder-suicide is extremely dramatic. And actually it uses what is really a cheap kind of B horror movie technique of, people talking about, oh, she's gone off with the baby, what's happening, and they're all remembering the fear that she was going to do something. And then it shows you the headline on an online newspaper that says, son dead with mother, something like that, and then it turns red and there's a scream sound effect, and you think, God, this is like a ghost train. That's so cheap. But actually I really didn't mind that. I know I should.
Yeah, I mean, I didn't mind it either, though. Like you, I felt it's like a melodrama, isn't it? Yeah, the whole narrative structure and everything is like a melodrama, and it cheats like cheap melodrama does. Yeah, and on the other hand, like I do feel a bit exploited. Yeah, that there are all kinds of facets to the story that a better filmmaker could have contextualized, taught you about. And still made you feel the same way, right? Because, I mean, I suppose what, and on the one hand, what I value is, I was on the verge of, my eyes were welled up for most of the film, but I also felt kind of cheated. Like, I felt manipulated, and that ruins the effect of the film for me.
I think it's very easy to feel that way, and I think, you're right, it's like, it is these two competing things of feeling the effects quite deeply. It has real effects on your emotional state, and also understanding exactly how it's withheld information in the right way to be able to, basically it treats the story like a thriller, I think, in some respects. Reveals information at certain points that change things. So you are left with this kind of irreconcilable thing of, I don't like how it did it, but I don't mind the effects that it created. Yeah. That's how I feel, at least.
Well, I do mind. I don't see, for example, why the film couldn't have been structured as to its real subject matter, which is the parents.
Yeah, it ends up saying this letter is for the parents.
Exactly, and it should have been from the beginning, because I think there is a real story there, I mean, about grief and loss, and a very loving family who finds their son murdered, right, and who then have to make nice with the murderer in order to be able to have access to their grandchild, right? I mean, that is a very potent story. You don't need to cheat it, right? And I think it is cheated. And I would have liked, you know, I would have liked for the film to have been about, kind of the parents, really. It is about the parents. But you have about a whole hour just about how wonderful the son was. Yeah. But I think you could have signaled the loss of that child to the parents and the brutality of that loss without all of that stuff. And I do feel it cheats it. And I also felt, so, you know, just like I was saying that I felt this kind of, you know, this is a beautiful life, a beautiful family, whatever, and yet, you know, kind of it's not accessible to me, so you feel this resentment, and actually that isn't explored, and also I don't think it's kind of realistic, because I think nobody's life is that perfect and that nice, and you know, and then I felt a little bit like, you know, when they go up to Canada, and it's almost as if, like, you know, the Canadian justice system is the enemy, right? And that Canada is being placed as the bad object, right? Like, you know, you basically get this feeling, you know, what is this place that allows, kind of, you know, this to happen without exploring it in greater depth? First of all, it's not your justice system. It is, you are in a different country, right? Something that is not kind of made evident until later on. They go up to Newfoundland, as if Newfoundland is like a province or you know, another kind of American state. It's a different country with different laws and different norms. You know, I think that's not signaled kind of properly.
Well, not enough is made of it. They don't they don't tell you that there's not a point in that. They may as well have moved to Maine.
Exactly. You know. I mean, imagine kind of, you know, an equivalent of a British film being made, and you go off to Germany to fight this case, and nothing is made of the fact that Germany has a different social system. So
is that partially a personal response as a Canadian of feeling like you're assumed to be just America's little brother? America's outhouse or something. So yes, that is obviously, I'm positioned that way. It is kind of a Canadian perspective on it. But also a further exploration, you know, that you are speaking from a country that, you know, unjustly jails black people as slave labor, and then you're going to Canada and kind of, you know, complaining about something like this, which possibly comes out of the best possible reasons, which is, you know, kind of, I'm sure that in Canada, you know, there might have been things about kind of, you know, women and their children and abused husbands, or there might be a reason why they're more flexible and kind of lenient and liberal in relation to kind of issues like this. There might have been antecedents of all kinds, right? I.e., kind of, you know, the murderess could have conned her way into taking advantage of, well, she did, of that liberality, right? But no attempt to understand why there might be those particular histories either, why kind of that liberality might be a gender-based one that benefits women, you know. Well, this is where it struck me that when I say it's a personal film, it's a personal perspective. It's about this thing that has affected this family and friends, and the filmmaker is one of them. And you know, it's interesting that towards the end, all these people have been interviewed, and one of them sort of says with a cheeky smile, "Who's interviewing you, Kurt?" And you get, well, the film is the interview, right? The fact that I've made this film, that is his voice, right? Speaking throughout the whole thing, and part of that voice is in, I suppose you could say it as taking it personally, right? Like, this story is about me and my friend, and that's why I only care about this and that. And you feel like, I think that lack of context and that kind of myopia or tunnel vision about it's just about this and this set of laws that led to this happening and allowed this to happen. Like, that's kind of why there's no context. You know, I'm not saying it's justifiable or good that there's no context, but I feel like the fact that there's no context marries with the kind of the rage and the passion that you feel behind the person who's making the film and why it's been made.
Actually, the rage and the passion, the thing that I found most moving, you know, was... Well, I think the parents are amazing, and I found them so moving, right, and so stoic and methodical and really desperate to do the right thing and to look after their grandchild, and you know, there are moments that just moved me so much that you really feel the love in gestures. You know, there was a moment where I think the son was graduating or something, and goes to hug the father, and the father gives him like an extra hard squeeze.
Yeah, it's when he becomes an Eagle Scout.
An Eagle Scout, yeah. I thought that was so moving. Like, you really feel that that's love, really. Well, the moms as well, but there just that moment, right? And there's the moment near the end where he just rages about that bitch. He just loses control completely, right? And that was so moving, right? Like, but I think for me, so as a gay man, so much of the film spoke to my exclusion. Yeah, like, just for example, they all live in like some little town in Iowa or some little town in Pennsylvania, Newfoundland. The whole province has like 500,000 people. Those are places with no space for someone like me. Those are spaces that people like me had to flee to just survive, right? And the people is made of what look like very nice people, right? So I don't want to kind of, but they're all churchgoers and kind of, like, it really, those are kind of people who I would often feel I have to protect myself. They might kill me, right? Like, so that's kind of...
So the film is kind of evoking a feeling of security and safeness and all of that you don't associate with it, really.
Yeah, that makes me unsafe.
Yeah.
That there's no place for me. I get kicked out of places like that. Right. So now, kind of, what does that mean? That I'm not saying you can't make films about people like that, right? But there is something about the love, the networks, the church, the extended families, the rural spaces. Yeah, kind of, some exclude me and some actively persecute me. So there's that sense of distance. Then there's the thing with, the Canadian
the way Canada is not really addressed properly.
Yes. Then there was the issue that the film has no analysis beyond the personal, And even in the personal, there are areas, that are just untouched, right? But that are clued in. Yeah, Zachary seems to me to be, so they call him cheeky, yeah? He's somebody who clearly drinks, who smokes, yeah? Who parties.
Andrew, sorry, you mean? Andrew.
Zachary.
Zachary's the baby.
Oh, sorry. Andrew, the father, yeah? Yeah, he's somebody who partied, right? Yeah, so I think kind of, had it been a more honest exploration, it would also have brought in those things. They're part of life, So I didn't like that element. Formally, I didn't like that the film doesn't know when to end. I did find, like, when is this going to end? Really, like, yeah. I thought the whole last bit, when I asked you what time.
Yeah, there was 15 minutes to go at that point.
Yeah, because I didn't see where the film was going,
No, I wonder whether, because I think part of the strategy is to have you not see where it's going, because that makes the shocks more shocking,
But it's cheap.
Yes, I mean, I agree with that too. And actually, I'm kind of wondering, as a film that is made with love for Andrew, for his son, for the parents, for everyone, apart from the murderer, is it honest to them? The fact that, as you say, it starts with Dear Zachary, it's to the son. It's only a long way into the film before we find out that the son is not even alive, and then it changes tack and eventually says, no, the letter is for the parents. Does that feel honest to Andrew and to Zachary? Because the film that is happening up until you discover that Zachary has been murdered is an overall lie.
Exactly.
Well,
I think the film is a lie, and I think, even though, like I said, I really was on the verge of tears throughout, but I think it's a lie, and it's unethical, because you need to know her story. What's her name? The mother?
Shirley Turner.
You need to know Shirley's story, right? First of all, she killed him, right? So she can't just be the cardboard, melodramatic, villainous, manipulative vixen. That's how this film depicts her, right? And I think, it's not only dishonest, I mean, it just cannot be true. People are not, like, entirely like that, right? But also, if you're really concerned about the son, yeah, then you need to know what the mother is, right? And moreover, the mother also left 3 other children. So this is something that's going to be seen by them. You know, kind of, we need to know more of this woman's story. You know, what were her hopes, her aspirations, her betrayals? Like, you know, she can't just be like the devil, like the film says. You know?
Yeah, and the parents say, and the film essentially agrees with that. Because what you were saying about the way that Andrew's life is, and Andrew's life with his parents and Kurt's life with Andrew is set up as this perfect, wonderful, he's everyone's friend, and blah, 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 is there to be disrupted by Shirley. You know, like that is the only, the reason I think it's missing anything else that would be a disruptive influence might partially be because they weren't really there. I give it that, you know, I give it enough credit to sort of say, I can believe this really, but it's also because it amplifies the disruptive influence. Disruptive is putting it very lightly. Of Shirley. She's introduced as this other thing, you know, because he's had a fiancée before that, Andrew, and she's been interviewed in the documentary. She seems nice. You're not really told why they broke up, I don't think. Actually, you're not at all. I mean,
You're not.
No, which you should really.
Yeah, you should.
It is just Shirley who is this wild card, this chaotic influence, and you don't have any understanding of what drives her or anything like that. The most you get is when the film is, I think it's around the point where she's killed Zachary and killed herself, that the film brings back all of this, this court judgment about why she could be let out on bail, and this line about, I'm not going to remember it exactly, but the line is something like, there's no psychological reason, or something like that. There's no psychological reason that she would be a threat because the crime was specific. And then it compares that, it brings in this stuff about how she's got 8 people who've got restraining orders against her, and she's suspected of murder before, which I think is like when it's said in that kind of montage moment. I think that's the first
time you hear about it.
I think that was the first time that had been said.
Yeah.
So the film is happy to tell. It's like an outpouring of rage every time she is mentioned, basically from the film. And in an outpouring of rage, like essentially, it's like the reason that you have a justice system is because outpourings of rage are not logical and they're not good for justice. But the film is happy to be vengeful to her, essentially.
And that's also
that means treating her without any sense of
humanity.
Right, that's a much better word than I was going to say, which would be fairness, which maybe she doesn't quite deserve, but humanity.
You know, the film, I mean, one of the reasons why the film makes me uncomfortable is because it's like Fatal Attraction. It is kind of like a kill the bitch film, right? It's like, hate this bitch, right? And then like, yeah. It gives you no other perspective on it than to hate her for having done these heinous things. Now, there's no argument that those things are heinous, really. But, you know, you need to know her better, yeah? And actually, I think the filmmakers have an obligation to paint a rounder picture of her if their claim that this film is for her children, yeah, is to be believed. And, of course, you know, it's not for that particular child, you know, because we eventually find out that she killed him too. But, you know, she does have other children who will be seeing this. And that all makes me uncomfortable.
Yeah, I agree with you. I started off by saying one of the very, very few things that I heard about this film was about the editing. Just people would remark upon the editing, or if it ever came up, they'd say, "Oh, it's great editing." So we should probably address that.
Go on.
I suppose there's a couple of kinds of editing, right? And in a way, we have addressed one, which is the structure of the story. But there's also shot-to-shot editing, and I found that really captivating.
Yes,
the way that the shortness of the shots. You sometimes get them for a couple of frames and they're coming at you thick and fast. The film uses this talking head aesthetic for a lot of it. Well, anytime it's talking to a person. They've been interviewed with a talking head thing. And there are times when, in order to amplify the emotion of whatever they're talking about, it'll play them over the top of each other and cut from them very, very quickly. So actually, what you're supposed to get out of a talking head on paper is this person's point of view and listen to the words they're saying. And what the film does is gives you a cacophony of them that overwhelms you. And actually, so you right at the start, you're talking about how wonderful Andrew is and how much fun he was. And everyone starts saying it. And so it becomes not about the individual people saying it and the individual things that they're saying. It's just them all agreeing at once.
Yes. I like that very much, though.
No, I'm saying that's great.
Yeah.
I think that's really effective, and I think it works very well with the music as well, which I think was self-composed by the director. He seems to do everything, and there's so much of the music really fits into. Again, I can see how you're using this. I can see the manipulation. We're playing happy music at the happy bit. We're playing shocking music at the shocking bit. All of that, and I did not mind it. Again, it completely fits in with. I can see what it's doing, and I don't mind.
Well, you see, for me, the thing is, I love the editing, and one of the things that I loved about the editing is that it was expressive. Yeah, it expressed something audiovisually about kind of what you were seeing, and it was creating those effects through the editing, giving you the filmmaker's point of view, right, on all of this is coming through the editing, and I like that very much. So, I think that this is, the work of a great editor, but actually kind of, not of a great director, not of a great documentary director, not someone who can, conceive of, of a complex kind of situation, convey it to you clearly, and give you an honest and rounded perspective on that issue. I think that, the to me, the conceptualization is simple-minded, yeah, and also, once the film shifted focus after the child died, why not just reconceptualize the film? Why continue it in the same way?
Yeah, I mean, you absolutely get the feeling. You absolutely get the feeling that the film. He started off editing it in 2002 when he started making it, and then after 2003, he just kept what he had and moved. You know what I mean? Like, He didn't start from scratch. You don't feel like
exactly.
Yeah.
So I think. In spite of what Louis Theroux said,
and everyone else, I mean, it's really highly regarded.
Okay.
Yeah.
Point taken. I don't agree with it. Yeah, I think it's a film that certainly, I was moved throughout, but as soon as you begin to think about it,
yeah, it's interesting.
All of these issues arise, of which, there's no retort to. Those problems are there. Yeah.
Yeah, and they're actually insurmountable. They are embedded.
Yes.
In the film. Despite that, I could recommend it to people, and I think it. I mean, and it would have to come without that proviso because you don't want to spoil it for someone. Like the real thrill and emotional effect of the film is in discovering what you discover when you discover it, and I could recommend it on that basis because I found it very moving, and it's a film that even though it does have these dishonesties behind it, essentially, the story that it's telling is fascinating. The love with which it's made and hate with which it's made,
yes,
is palpable.
Yes,
and I don't think I've ever seen a documentary that feels as emotionally available as this one.
That's true. I mean, I found it very moving, but I think what I found most moving about it were in details in the captured footage. Yeah, I mean, it is a film in which kind of. What is conveyed most clearly is love, really, which is what's so moving about it, really. Yeah, the interactions between the parents, like sometimes the way they touch or the way they look or the way they comfort, it's just so moving, right? Like kind of, in a world where you're taught that like that kind of thing is like a 1,000,000 to 1 shot or an impossibility, you are seeing it as a kind of an ordinary and quotidian relations of a loving couple, in their 6th or 7th decade or whatever it is, and really a kind of a completely unselfish and complete love for their child. Yeah. So I think all of that is there, but for me the other problems are also kind of insurmountable. I mean, if documentary is not about truth and ethics, what is it about, really? Yeah, and this is a film that I think fails in relation to both. There's a kind of a more complex story that to be told, and in not telling it, it ends up not being quite true. Yeah, and then there's an ethical dimension on that telling. Yeah, which I think, is also kind of very problematic.
I do know what you mean, but I do think that is mitigated by this ultimate personality, personal aspect of the film, that it's from this director who knew this family, knew this guy. It's his emotions speaking through, and he's constantly talking. Right, he does present certain things as true, but I think if you are wise enough to see that it's a person's opinion being presented as true, that's kind of how I feel like it's.
I don't know. I feel the film can distinguish, and that's part of its problem. So, you see the couple, And, that love is true, and it's constant, and it's accepting. Yeah, and you see it in a period of like 30 years to child and grandchild. Yeah. And then at the end you have all this, we love you, we love you, we love you, we love you, we love you. Yeah. And you think, fuck off. And the film can't distinguish. I mean, I'm not saying that those people don't have goodwill towards, but if you can't distinguish between, friends of your dead child 10 years later saying, we love you, and the love that is expressed by those parents to that child and the grandchild, then the film is worth very little. And I think actually the film doesn't distinguish those things.
No. I would say, though, it's also different from most true crime. Because I'm not a huge fan of true crime. I've watched some of it, and what I tend to find with it is that it's an attempt to relitigate something that hasn't been properly litigated as far as the documentary makers are concerned. Maybe as far as popular opinion is concerned. This story, someone got away with a crime and we're going to go into it. That's not quite the case here. I mean, it is a story about how a justice system has failed these people, according to these people.
But you see, I think the other thing that I resented is you do see how the system failed, these people, but you also see how quickly that was redressed, right? There was a national inquiry, there was a report kind of formulated, and you're told 58 laws were changed, right? Imagine that happening in the US.
Well, I mean, I don't really know enough historical context.
Well,
there might be some.
Well, we all know, I mean, we keep hearing stories about all those people, spending lifetime in jail because, kind of 3 times, and you do the time, like, for having some grass in your pocket or whatever. The forced labor camps, which is what all of those prisons are. The for-profit prison system. That there's an incentive to jail people. No, I mean, there have been activists trying to change those prison rules, throughout with no success. So, here is a clear sign of a success. Yeah, kind of this couple were able to change kind of the law. And you see, the report. It's a huge, right?
You do.
And the child died in 2002. The film is 2008. In that 3 or 4 period, all of that was changed. So I'm saying this as a Canadian, just out of the resentment of the film, kind of positioning this.
I was going to say that. I was going to say for what the film did to you, you can get away with saying this to the. But I think you're true, because I was going to say actually, this is the kind of thing that does get changed when a 2-year-old dies. I think you do see laws change when something that heinous happens. But then it made me think about, was it Sandy Hook in the US where children were killed at school? And people were basically saying if they can't change the gun laws after 5-year-olds have died.
Exactly.
So I think you've got a point.
Thank you. Anyway, let's wrap this up. So you recommend...
Well, kind of guardedly, right? And if you have the conversation afterwards.
Yeah. And I suppose, I think to be really honest, as I said, I was on the verge of tears throughout. It's a very affecting film, and then if you agree with, all of the problems if you agree with me about the problems that it might have, it nonetheless kind of, leads to, I think, a very interesting and necessary discussions, about both the subject matter of the film and kind of, what the film intervenes in. So, and the whole question of, documentary and what it does. I think there's no reasons not to recommend it.
Yeah, fair enough. Fair summing up. Well done.
Thank you. Thank you very much for listening. We are eavesdropping at the movies, and we are on
Apple Podcasts, Spotify, Google Podcasts, SoundCloud, and YouTube. On social media, we're on Facebook and Twitter, and the website is eavesdroppingatthemovies.com.
Yes. Oh, and if you do like the podcast, please retweet. We've been having some very nice response from all of you, but we would appreciate getting this to as large audience as possible. So if you do like, and only if you like, but please retweet.
Yeah, please share. It's it would mean a lot, and it would help us.
Yes, thank you.
Thank you.
You be the judge.